The night was cold and the broken city lay silent under a pale moon. Shadows stretched across ruined buildings, their windows like empty eyes watching everything. In the middle of the rubble moved a thin figure, her steps slow, her body weak, her face tired. She was an alien widow, her skin pale gray, her clothes torn, her stomach empty. For 3 days she had not found real food, only dirty water and dust. Her people were gone, her home was burned, and now she was nothing but a wanderer. Still, her will to live pushed her forward one step after another. She searched through trash piles near an old marketplace. The air smelled of smoke and rot, but hunger made her dig with shaking hands. At last her eyes caught sight of something small, a piece of bread, hard and moldy. To her it was treasure. It was hope. She reached for it quickly, but before her fingers could close around it, a growl froze her heart. From the dark corner came a wild dog, its fur thin, its ribs sharp, under the skin, its eyes burning with hunger. It had seen the bread too, and it wanted it. The widow held the bread close, stepping back, but the dog leaped forward with snapping teeth. Fear shook her body, yet she could not let go. If she dropped the bread, she would starve, and she knew this might be her last chance to live. The fight was desperate. Her hands scratched, her arm bitten, her blood dripping on the stones. She kicked and pulled, the dog snarled and clawed. The bread torn between them, pain filled her vision, but still she did not let go. At last she threw herself sideways, smashing her body against a broken wall. The dog yelped, surprised, and the bread slipped into her hand. She clutched it tight, though her wound burned and her breath came in gasps. The dog backed away, growling once more before running into the night. She was left alone, shaking, bleeding, and weak. The bread was hers, but her victory felt empty. Her arm throbbed, the blood would not stop, and she could feel her strength. Slipping away, she staggered to a corner, sat against the wall, and raised the bread to her mouth. It tasted bitter, sour, but still she chewed slowly. Each bite was painful, each swallow heavy. But at least it was something. Tears filled her eyes as she thought of her past. Once she had a home, a husband, a child, laughter in the air, food on the table. Now there was only silence, only hunger, only wounds. Her people had fallen in wars, and the city was left for the desperate. No one cared for a widow, no one offered her kindness. In her heart she whispered, "Perhaps I should stop fighting. Perhaps it is better to let go." Her vision blurred. Her head dropped to her chest, her breath shallow. The night grew colder, her wound darker, and she felt herself sinking. The bread lay forgotten in her lap, half-eaten. She closed her eyes, ready to fade into the dark. But then, something strange happened. A sound, soft but clear, reached her ears. It was not the growl of an animal nor the whisper of wind. It was footsteps, steady, careful, coming closer. Her heart raced, fear rising again. Was it raiders? Thieves? Another enemy come to finish her life? She tried to move, but her body was too weak, her limbs heavy as stone. A shadow fell across her, and she felt a presence. She forced her eyes open, and in the pale moonlight she saw a human. A man with tired eyes, scars on his arms, and clothes as torn as hers. He crouched down beside her, his face unreadable. She expected him to take the bread, to laugh at her weakness, to leave her, to die. But instead he pulled out a strip of cloth clean enough to be rare in this broken land. Without a word he wrapped her bleeding arm. His hands were rough but gentle, his movements steady. The cloth pressed against her wound, stopping the blood. Then he placed something before her, a piece of bread, not moldy, not dirty, but fresh. Her eyes widened, her heart confused. Why would a human give her food when most would keep it for themselves? Why would he help an alien widow when others spat on her kind? She stared at him, too weak to speak, too shocked to move. The man only nodded, as if telling her, "Eat, you are safe for now." The smell of the bread filled her senses, and she realized she was still alive. Her hand shook as she reached for it, unsure if it was real. The human watched her silently, waiting, his eyes not cruel, but tired. She took a small bite, and warmth spread through her cold body. Her tears fell again, but this time not only from pain. In the silent night, beside ruined walls, an alien widow and a human sat together. One had fought a dog for scraps. The other had chosen to share his bread. Her wound still burned. Her fear still whispered. But for the first time in many nights, she felt something new. Hope. Yet deep inside her heart, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why would a human help her? And what did he truly want? The night stretched on, cold and endless, but the widow was no longer alone. The human sat near her, silent, keeping watch as if danger might rise at any moment. His face was hard, but his eyes carried a weight she could not understand. She tried to study him through half-closed eyes, wondering what kind of man he was. Why would he share food? Why would he cover her wound when survival demanded selfishness? Her people had always told her that humans were cruel, that they took what they wanted and left the weak behind. Yet here was one kneeling beside her, giving without asking, guarding without promise. The fire of suspicion burned in her heart. Perhaps it was a trick. Perhaps he wanted her to trust him so he could use her later. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the bread he had given. She thought of throwing it away, but her stomach twisted in pain, begging her not to. Finally, she ate, bite after bite, while keeping her eyes fixed on him. The man said nothing, only gave a small nod, then leaned back against the wall. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crack of rubble under the cold wind. When her strength returned enough to whisper, she asked one word. Why? The human looked at her, his face unreadable, his jaw tight. He didn't answer at first, then finally said in a low voice, "Because you needed help." Simple words, but to her they felt like a riddle. She had never heard a reason so plain, so empty of gain, so strange. Her wound ached, but it was wrapped well. The cloth pressed against the cut, slowing the blood, warming her skin. She remembered her people's lessons, how they told stories of humans as monsters. Yet his touch had not been cruel, his gift had not been poisoned. The confusion swirled, inside her, louder than her hunger, stronger than her fear. Hours passed, and still he remained. Now and then he glanced outside. As if expecting trouble, she noticed the weapon at his side, a knife sharp and worn. She wondered if he would use it on her when morning came. The thought made her shiver, but exhaustion pulled her into uneasy sleep. When dawn broke, light touched the ruined streets. The widow opened her eyes and found the human still there, awake, guarding. For a moment she thought it was a dream, but the pain in her arm and the bandage around it told her it was real. The human gave her a small flask of water, and again she whispered, "Why help me?" He answered the same, "Because you needed it." No anger, no demand, no bargain, only those strange words. Still she could not trust. She kept her body close to the wall, her legs ready to run though she was weak. The human noticed but said nothing, as if her fear was expected. Together they sat in silence until a sound broke the fragile calm. At first it was faint, a crack of stone, a shuffle of steps. The human raised his hand, motioning for her to stay. Still, her heart raced. Her breath caught in her chest. The man moved slowly, crouching low, knife ready in his grip. The widow's body froze, her mind screaming questions. Was it the dog returning, or raiders searching the ruins? Or something worse? The sound grew louder, closer. Voices whispered beyond the broken walls, harsh and greedy. She could hear laughter, cruel and sharp, the kind that promised violence. Her blood turned cold, and fear wrapped around her like chains. The human glanced at her, his eyes firm, steady, telling her without words to stay quiet. Her wound throbbed, her body shook, and she realized she was trapped. She wanted to crawl away, but her legs had no strength. Her only hope now lay in the stranger beside her, the man she did not trust. The voices came nearer, boots crushing rubble. The men outside were searching, hunting, their hunger not for food but for power. One of them shouted, "Check inside, there might be survivors." The widow's breath caught in her throat, Her fingers dug into the ground. The human crouched lower, ready like a shadow waiting to strike. For a heartbeat, everything was silent, and then heavy steps moved straight toward their shelter. The widow's mind spun. She thought of her husband, her child, all lost in the war. She thought of the dog, of the fight for scraps, of the human who had given her bread, and she realized if raiders entered now, she would not stand a chance. Only the stranger's knife, only his courage, stood between her and death. Her heart pounded so loud she feared the intruders would hear it. The human's hand tightened on the knife, his eyes cold as stone. The footsteps stopped right outside the wall, and a shadow darkened the doorway. The shadow filled the doorway, tall and rough. The widow's heart froze, her breath stuck in her throat. The human did not move, his knife tight in his hand, his eyes sharp as a predator. For a long moment, silence ruled, only the sound of her blood rushing in her ears. Then a voice came, low and ugly. "Food, water, anything, check inside." Another man laughed outside. "If we find survivors, we take what they have and maybe more." The widow felt sick. She had seen raiders before and she knew they showed no mercy. They killed for sport. They took whatever pleased them. They were wolves in human skin. The first man stepped in, his boots crunching rubble. He carried a metal pipe, and his face was twisted with greed. His eyes locked on the widow. At once, seeing her pale skin, her wounded arm, a smile spread across his lips, cruel and hungry. "Look here," he sneered. "An alien rat hiding scraps." Before he could step closer, the human struck. He moved fast, like he had done this many times before. The knife flashed, and the raider screamed as blood ran down his arm. The man stumbled back, shouting for help. Voices outside rose, angry, rushing closer. The widow's body shook, fear pulling at her like chains. She wanted to run, but her wound held her down. The human grabbed her arm, pulling her deeper into the shadows. "Stay low," he whispered, his voice like iron. She obeyed, though terror burned her chest. More raiders stormed inside, 3 men, each armed with blades and pipes. Their eyes burned with hunger, their mouths curled in cruelty. "Kill him!" one shouted, pointing at the human. The fight began, fast and brutal. The human blocked a swing, his knife cutting sharp. One raider fell with a cry, clutching his chest. The others pressed hard, 2 against 1, their blows wild, but deadly. The widow watched, trapped between fear and a strange fire inside her. Her people had taught her to hide, to avoid humans, to never stand in their battles. But as she saw the human bleed, saw his arm cut by a metal pipe, something inside her snapped. She reached for a stone on the ground, her hands shaking. When one raider raised his blade to strike the human's back, she threw it with all her strength. The stone hit his temple, not enough to kill but enough to break his focus. The human turned fast, his knife striking true. The raider collapsed, his scream cut short. The last man cursed, his courage breaking, and ran from the shelter into the streets. The silence returned, heavy and sharp. The widow gasped for breath, her chest tight, her wound burning. The human stood over the fallen raiders, his face hard, his knife dripping red. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "You fought?" he said, his voice low, almost surprised. She lowered her head, ashamed and shaken. I had to," she whispered, her voice weak. Her hands trembled, but inside her chest something stirred, a small spark of strength she thought she had lost forever. The human searched the raiders, his hands steady. He found a small pouch of dried fruit, a flask of water, and a piece of cloth. But more than food, he found a map, folded and dirty, hidden in the pocket of the first raider. He opened it under the pale morning light, his eyes narrowing. The widow leaned closer, curious despite her fear. The map showed the ruins of the city, and far to the east, a mark, a bunker. Words were written beside it, faded but clear enough. Supplies stored, last safe point. The human's lips pressed into a thin line. "Food," he muttered. "Maybe medicine, maybe more." The widow's stomach turned at the thought. Could it be true? Could there really be a place with supplies waiting? Her heart beat faster. But doubt struck too. If raiders had the map, others might know as well. The place could already be taken, or worse, a trap. The human folded the map and slipped it into his coat. His eyes lifted to her, steady and sharp. "You cannot stay here," he said. "More will come, they always come." She nodded weakly. Knowing his words were true, the fight had left her shaken but also changed. She had stood with him even if only for a moment. For the first time she felt less like prey, and more like something that could fight back. But trust still weighed, heavy on her chest. She did not know why this human helped her, why he shared food, why he protected her. Every step closer to him was a step against everything she had been taught. Yet without him, she would already be dead. Her eyes dropped, to the bandage on her arm, to the bread in her lap, to the knife still dripping red. Survival whispered to her heart, louder than her fear. The human stood, his back to her, his knife wiped clean. "We leave at first light tomorrow," he said. "East, to the bunker." His voice carried no question, no offer, only command. The widow looked at the bodies of the raiders, at the blood on the stones. Her throat tightened, her heart heavy. The city was no longer safe, the shadows no longer quiet. And though fear filled her soul, she knew she had no choice. As the sun rose over the broken city, painting the ruins in red light, the widow sat in silence, the map heavy in her thoughts. The human stood guard, his eyes scanning the horizon, his jaw set like stone. For the first time she realized their fates were now tied together. Her fear had not left, her distrust still burned, but in the heart of her chest something else had begun to grow, a fragile, dangerous hope. And in the ruins of silence, one question whispered again and again, what waits for them at the bunker? The city was silent when they left, but silence did not mean safety. The widow walked slowly, her steps weak, her wound aching under the rough bandage. Beside her, the human moved with steady pace, his knife at his side. His eyes always searching the shadows, the ruined street stretched endless. Broken buildings leaning like tired giants. Ash floated in the air, carried by the wind, whispering of fires long gone. The widow held the bread he had given, saving every crumb, though hunger burned her stomach. She did not speak, and neither did he. The road ahead was long, and trust was a heavy weight neither of them wished to carry. Every step she asked herself the same question. Why would a human help her, when most would kill her kind without thought? Her people had told her of human cruelty, of betrayal and greed. Yet this man had bandaged her, fed her, fought raiders to protect her. But what if he was only keeping her alive for his own gain? Perhaps he wanted her strength, her alien knowledge, her service. The thought twisted inside her like a knife. Still, she walked, for she had no other choice. The map was folded in his coat, guiding them east through ruins and broken fields. They crossed streets full of rusted vehicles, their bones. Eaten by time, they passed shattered towers, now nests for crows and rats. Sometimes the widow heard footsteps far behind. But when she turned, nothing was there. Her fear grew with every shadow, with every whisper of wind. But the human never flinched, his gaze sharp, his hand ready on his knife. She hated him for his calm, and yet she clung to it. Like a drowning soul clings to driftwood. When night fell, they rested inside the shell of a collapsed house. The human built a small fire from broken wood, its smoke faint against the stars. The widow sat across from him, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes watching him carefully. He offered her water, and she took it with trembling hands. Still she did not trust, still she feared. Her people had died from poisoned gifts before, and old lessons whispered warnings in her ears, but thirst was stronger than suspicion, and she drank, her throat burning with need. Later, when the fire was low, she dared to ask, "Why do you risk so much for me?" The human looked at the flames, his face unreadable. After a long silence, he answered, "I lost everything in the war." His voice was flat, but heavy with truth. "My wife, my child, my home, all gone." The widow's heart tightened, the words striking deep. She had lost the same, her husband, her child, her home. For a moment she felt their grief mirror one another, but she pushed the thought away, shaking her head. His pain was his, and hers was hers. They could not be the same. The human continued, "Helping you gives me purpose, something to hold on to." He said no more, and silence returned. The widow stared at him, torn between suspicion and something softer. Could it be true, or was it another trick she did not know? And the not knowing burned her more than hunger. The next day the land opened into broken fields. Once these had been farms, green and full of life. Now they were gray wastelands, the soil dead, the rivers black with poison. The widow's throat ached for clean water, but every stream they passed smelled of death. The human gave her a little from his flask, though it left him with almost none. Her heart whispered thanks, but her lips stayed silent. She would not give him the satisfaction of trust, not yet. By the third night, her wound ached worse. She stumbled often, her breath shallow, her strength fading. The human noticed, though. She tried to hide it. He stopped, crouched before her, and checked the bandage. The cloth was dark with blood. The cut still angry and red. "We need medicine," he muttered, more to himself than her. She pulled away, ashamed of her weakness. "Leave me," she whispered. "You will move faster alone." But his eyes hardened, his voice sharp. "No, we move together, or not at all." His words shook her, not for their strength, but for the strange weight they carried. Why would a human tie his fate to hers? Why would he not abandon her? She did not answer, only turned her face away, hiding the confusion in her eyes. At last, after days of walking, the bunker appeared on the horizon, half buried under rubble, its iron doors tall and rusted. The widow's heart raced, her body trembling. Could it truly hold food, medicine, safety, or was it only another ruin? The human's pace quickened, his eyes fixed on the entrance, but as they drew closer, the widow's stomach twisted. Voices echoed faintly from inside. She froze, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. Someone was already there. The human raised his hand, signaling her to stay silent. He crouched low, creeping closer, his knife drawn. The widow followed, every step heavy with fear. Through the broken wall she saw them, figures moving inside the bunker. Some were human, some alien survivors like them, armed and tense. Her pulse quickened, dread rising like fire in her chest. Would they welcome strangers or drive them away? Would they share food or kill to keep it? The widow's hands shook, her mind screaming warnings. She turned to the human, her voice low and broken. "They will not let me in." His eyes met, hers, hard and steady. "Then I will make them," he said. The words hit her like thunder, filling her with fear and disbelief. The bunker loomed before them, a promise and a threat, and in her heart, one question screamed louder than the rest. Were they walking into salvation, or into another death trap? The bunker doors groaned as the human pushed them open, the sound echoing across the ruins. The widow's chest tightened, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. Inside the bunker, shadows moved, weapons glinted in the dim light. Figures turned sharply, their eyes hard, their bodies tense. Some were human, some were alien. All survivors, all hungry, all desperate. The silence was sharp, a knife hanging in the air. One man stepped forward, his beard wild, his voice rough. "Who are you and why are you here?" The human stood tall, his knife sheathed but his stance firm. "We seek food and shelter," he said, his voice steady. The widow stayed behind him, her body pressed close to the wall, her fear burning in her chest. Already she saw the way their eyes locked on her. Their faces twisted with distrust, an alien widow in a human group. She knew what they thought. A burden, a curse, a thief. A woman with sharp eyes spat on the ground. "No aliens," she snapped. "They ruined this world. They don't deserve our food." Others muttered in agreement, some human, some alien, each choosing sides. The widow lowered her head, shame and rage twisting together. She wanted to vanish, to fade into the shadows. But the human spoke again. "She stays," he said firmly, his voice cutting the air like steel. "She fights, she earns her place, she eats what I eat." The group erupted in anger. Voices loud. One shouted, "Then you leave with her." Another growled, "She'll betray us the first chance she gets." The widow's throat closed, fear crushing her chest. She waited for him to give up, to abandon her, but he did not move. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes sharp, his jaw hard. "Test her," he said. "Give her work. Give her danger. Let her prove herself." The group fell silent, whispers passing like snakes. Finally, the bearded man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You want her tested? Then she will be tested," he said. He pointed toward the broken machines at the back of the bunker. "Those power units have been dead for months. No one here knows how to fix them. If she can, she stays. If she fails, you both leave." The widow's stomach twisted, her hands trembling. Machines had once been part of her people's knowledge. Her husband had taught her many things before the war. Before death, perhaps she could, perhaps not. But she had no choice. Their lives now rested on her skill. The human gave her a steady nod, his eyes telling her silently, "Try." She knelt by the machines, her fingers brushing wires and broken panels. Dust covered every inch, rust clung to metal bones. She closed her eyes, remembering her husband's voice, his hands guiding hers. Slowly she worked, cutting wires, joining pieces, whispering prayers to herself. The group watched in silence, their distrust heavy as stone. Minutes stretched like hours, every spark making her heart jump. At last, with a crack and hum, the machines flickered to life. Lights glowed weakly across the bunker, dim but real. Gasps filled the air, shock on every face. The widow sat back, her body shaking, her wound aching. She had done it. She had proved her worth. Still the eyes of many stayed cold, filled with hate, but others softened, their voices unsure. "She fixed it," someone whispered. "We need her." The bearded man stroked his chin, his eyes still sharp. "Very well," he said. "You may stay, for now." Relief washed over her, but it was thin, fragile. She knew many here still wanted her gone. The human stood beside her, his shoulders steady. He had defended her, given her a chance, and she had not failed. For the first time, a spark of trust lit inside her chest, small, dangerous but real. As night fell, the bunker grew quieter, the survivors settling into uneasy rest. The widow sat near the wall, her arm bandaged tighter, her body heavy with exhaustion. The human sat close, his eyes always watching. She whispered, so soft he almost did not hear, "Why do you fight for me?" He looked at her, his gaze heavy. "Because I refuse to be like the rest," he said simply. The word struck her heart like a blade, sharp, unforgettable. For a moment silence stretched between them, but then a sound shattered it, sharp and mechanical. An alarm blared through the bunker, red lights flashing weakly on the walls. The survivors jumped to their feet, weapons raised, eyes wide with fear. The widow's blood ran cold, her chest tightening. The human pulled his knife, his jaw set. "What is it?" she whispered. Though her heart already knew, a man near the machine shouted, his voice breaking with panic. "Drones!" he cried. "Old war drones, heading straight for us." The sound grew louder outside, a metallic hum rising in the night. The survivors scrambled, shouting, their voices filled with terror. The widow's heart pounded, her fear a storm. She had seen war drones before, machines built to kill, and now they were coming for the bunker. The human stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Then we fight," he said. The widow stared at the doorway, her body trembling, her soul screaming. Enemies or allies? Would any of them survive what was coming? The alarm screamed through the bunker, red light flashing weakly across stone walls. The survivors scrambled like frightened animals, grabbing weapons, shouting orders, colliding in panic. The widow pressed her back against the wall, her hands shaking, her breath short. She had heard that sound before, long ago when war machines stormed her people's cities. Back then she had hidden while others died. Now the sound of the drones returning dragged old terror through her chest. The human stood steady, his knife ready, his eyes cold. He did not panic like the others. He did not scream. He simply turned toward the door, his jaw hard, his body still. "Stay close," he said to her, his voice sharp as steel. The widow wanted to run, to hide, but his calm pulled her forward. If he could stand, then so could she. The bunker shook as the first drone landed outside, its metal legs slammed against the earth, its sensors glowing red. The hum of its engine filled the night, joined by the whine of more behind it. Soon the air outside buzzed with death. One survivor shouted, "They've tracked the power units, we woke them up." The widow's stomach twisted, guilt burning. By fixing the machines, she had given the drones their signal, their target. The door burst open with fire and smoke. A drone stormed inside, metal claws snapping, its weapon glowing bright. The survivors screamed and scattered, blades and pipes useless against steel. The human moved first, his knife flashing. He dove low, slashing wires under the machine's belly. Sparks rained down. The drone shrieked in static, collapsing with a crash, but more followed, crawling through the doorway like spiders of war. The widow's breath came fast, her heart hammering. Her mind screamed to hide, to vanish, but children cried in the corner. One boy no older than her son had been stood frozen in terror. When a drone raised its weapon toward him, she moved without thought. Her body leapt, her arm burning with pain. She shoved the boy aside and grabbed a broken pipe from the floor. With a cry that tore from her soul, she smashed it against the machine's eye. The drone spun, sparks flying, its aim broken. The human was there in an instant, his knife striking deep. Together they brought it down. The survivors stared, shocked. They had seen the alien widow not as weak, not as prey, but as fighter. Still no time for words, more drones poured in. The bunker filled with smoke, fire, and screams. Every corner became a battlefield, every breath a struggle. The human fought like a man with nothing left to lose. The widow fought like a soul who had finally chosen to live. One drone cornered the sharp-eyed woman who had cursed the widow earlier. Its claws reached for her throat. The widow lunged, slamming her pipe against its arm. Breaking the grip, the woman gasped, shock flooding her face. For a heartbeat their eyes met, enemy to enemy. Then the woman swung her blade, cutting through exposed wires, finishing the drone. No words passed between them, but the look was enough. The line between hatred and survival had cracked. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, the fight endless, bodies of drones piled high, their sparks lighting the bunker like dying stars. Blood-covered stone, human and alien alike. The widow's arms shook, her breath ragged, her wound bleeding anew. Still she did not stop, still she swung the pipe. Her mind whispered of her husband, her child, their voices urging her forward. For them, for herself, she would not fall here. At last, silence came. The final drone crashed to the floor, its light fading. The bunker stank of smoke and metal. Survivors lay slumped against walls, exhausted, some wounded, some gone. The widow dropped the pipe, her hands raw, her body trembling. The human stood beside her, chest rising heavy. Blood. Across his arm he looked at her, his face unreadable, his eyes steady. "You fought," he said simply. She lowered her head, her breath shuddering. "I had to," she whispered, though deep inside she knew it was more than that. The survivors gathered slowly, their eyes turning toward the widow, some still filled with hate, but others with respect. One man spoke, his voice weak but clear. "She saved my boy." Another nodded. "She saved all of us. Without her we would be dead, would be." The sharp-eyed woman, once her loudest enemy, said nothing, but when their eyes met she gave the smallest of nods. It was not trust, not yet, but it was something. Among the wreckage, the bearded man found a metal case. Inside were faded papers, coordinates marked in bold ink. His voice trembled as he read, "A colony, still standing far from here, may be safe." The survivors stirred, hope flickering in their tired eyes. The widow listened, her heart torn. A safe colony. Could it be true, or only another lie, another trap? The human's gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "We go," he said. "We can't stay here. More will come." Her body ached, her wound throbbed, her fear whispered. But something stronger moved inside her now. Not only survival, not only hunger, but the spark of belonging, the fire of purpose. She nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Then we go." The survivors packed quickly, carrying what little food and water remained. The widow stood among them, no longer hidden, no longer silent. She was weak, she was scarred, but she was no longer prey. The human stayed close, his knife at his side, his eyes on the horizon. Together they stepped into the cold night. The world still broken, still dangerous, but for the first time, she did not walk alone. Far above, in the dark hills, something moved. A faint light flickered, not of drones, but of watching eyes. The widow felt a chill run down her spine, though she did not know why. The battle was over, but the war was not. And as the survivors began their journey, the question rose like a shadow. Would the colony bring them salvation, or lead them into a new nightmare? The road stretched long before them, broken earth under gray skies. The widow walked with slow steps, her wound aching but her spirit steadier than before. Beside her, the human carried his knife, his eyes scanning every hill, every shadow. Behind them, the survivors followed, tired but alive, clinging to the promise of a safe colony. The map guided their path, each mark leading them deeper into the wasteland. The widow kept her eyes forward, though doubt whispered inside her heart. The group was quieter now, the sharp edge of distrust dulled by the battle they had shared. Some still looked at her with suspicion, but others gave small nods, even brief smiles. The boy she had saved walked near her side, his small hand gripping his mother's cloak. Every time his eyes lifted to her, wide with gratitude, she felt a strange warmth. It was a feeling she thought she had lost when her own child was taken by the war. The human noticed her glance, but he said nothing, only walked steady. His silence carried more weight than words. Days passed, and the wasteland tested them. Storms of ash swept across the plains, choking air and burning lungs. Twice they found rivers, but both were black with poison. They rationed water until their throats cracked, their lips bleeding with thirst. Still, they walked, driven by hope, stronger than hunger. The widow's legs trembled each night, but each morning she rose again. She had once fought dogs for scraps. Now she fought despair for survival. On the fifth night, as they camped in the ruins of an old watchtower, the widow sat near the fire, watching sparks rise into the dark sky. The human sat across from her, sharpening his knife. For long minutes they spoke no words, only the fire filled the silence. At last she asked softly, her voice uncertain, "Why do you never rest? Why do you always watch?" He lifted his eyes, his face shadowed by flame. "Because the world doesn't forgive those who sleep too deeply," he said. She lowered her gaze, her heart heavy with understanding. Still, she whispered, "And yet you trust me enough to close your eyes sometimes." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, a rare ghost of a smile. "Yes," he said, "I trust you." The word struck her deeper than any wound. For so long, trust had been a dream she thought lost. Her people had told her humans could never be trusted. Yet here was one who had placed his life in her hands more than once. The fire cracked, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to believe perhaps not all was broken. The journey dragged on, harder with every mile. 2 survivors died along the way, their bodies too weak for the road. They buried them under stone, their names whispered to the wind. The widow stood over the graves, her chest tight. She knew the pain of loss. She knew it too well. But this time, she was not the only one grieving. The group shared it, carried it together. And in that shared grief, something fragile began to grow. Not just survival, but belonging. At last, after many days, the colony appeared in the distance. High walls of metal rose above the wasteland, their towers shining with faint lights. The survivors gasped, hope rushing through their tired bodies. The widow stared, her heart pounding. Could this truly be safety? Could this truly be a place where she belonged? Or was it another lie? Another cruel trick of the broken world? As they drew closer, guards appeared on the walls, weapons raised. Voices shouted, "Who comes? What do you want?" The human stepped forward, his voice strong. Survivors looking for shelter, looking for peace. The widow waited, fear clawing at her throat. Would they reject her again? Would they cast her out? The guards hesitated, whispering among themselves. Finally, the gates groaned open, slowly, heavily. "Enter," a voice called. "But know this. You must earn your place here." The group entered, their eyes wide at the sight within. Green patches of crops, wells of clear water, children laughing faintly in the distance. The widow's throat tightened, her chest aching. She had not seen life like this. Since before the war, she wanted to fall to her knees, to weep, but she held herself steady. The human walked beside her, his hand brushing hers briefly. No words passed, but the touch spoke louder than any vow. Inside, the survivors were given food, water, and beds of straw. The widow sat with a bowl in her hand, staring at the steam rising from real soup. She ate slowly, every bite tasting of memory, of hope, of tears. Around her, children laughed, women smiled, men sighed in relief. For the first time in years, life felt possible. Again, but deep inside, a whisper of fear remained. Safety was never free. Safety was never forever. That night, as the stars glowed faintly above the colony walls, the widow stood alone looking at the horizon. The human joined her, silent as always. She spoke at last, her voice low but firm. "We cannot survive alone, not anymore. Together we have a chance." He nodded, his eyes steady. "Then we stay, and we fight for this place." Her heart softened, her fear still alive but smaller now. For once, she was not only a widow, not only prey, she was something more, a survivor, a fighter, a partner. And perhaps one day, she could even call herself whole again. But far beyond the walls, in the hills where shadows moved, a figure watched the colony through broken lenses. Its eyes glowed faint red, its voice crackled with static. "Target located," it whispered. "New coordinates received." The war had not ended, the machines had not forgotten, and though the widow had found a beginning, the storm was not over. Her new life had only just begun, and the greatest fight was still waiting.